Welcome to JGTCR, I'm Coupe, and today we are tuning the Audi TT Coupe 3.2 quattro. Let's get into it. In factory trim, this Audi is very sloppy. The suspension is rather loose and it works well until it doesn't. It drives well if we choose to drive modestly, but as we know, that's just not racing. When pushing the TT Coupe to its limits, the problem we face is traction. If you accelerate, you lose traction. If you turn, you lose traction. If you brake, you lose traction. In fact, you'll have to work very hard to keep traction, Nick. When this Audi does slide, time just slips away at a phenomenal rate, so it's best to be cautious and ease on and off all of our inputs. The spongy suspension works well for modest driving, but once we start pushing, it's wobble nation under our seat. Power delivery is adequate for the platform, but it should be noted that power falls off very quickly past redline, so shift properly or lose time. When under braking conditions, nosediving is commonplace. The tail end gets wrigglies, believe it or not, and frequently attempts to overtake the front end. So be very cautious under braking, as the tail end can snap back and send us into a spin. Let's get that time. 8 minutes 16.1 seconds. Let's take a look at the race tune. The tune for the TT Coupe is very simple. Most of our suspension settings have been changed at equal levels. To reduce some of our torque steer issues, the front differential has had acceleration and braking sensitivity both reduced to 50%. Let's see it in action on the Nürburgring. When completely modified and tuned, the Audi TT Coupe 3.2 quattro becomes a very quick and nimble vehicle. It hugs the turns extremely well and responds to inputs in a timely manner. The suspension is firm and handles well, but bumps and uneven surfaces can cause oversteer. It's nothing a few bleps of the throttle won't fix, but it should be noted. The steering is considerably accurate on turn-in, but it still can occasionally suffer from understeer. It is very predictable to drive. Even oversteer and understeer moments can be seen coming a mile away. It just comes down to us to do something about it. The brakes are a huge improvement over factory. No more tail wagging the dog, just solid steady braking that keeps us in control. Let's collect our time. 6 minutes 35.7 seconds. And now the drift tune. Our four-wheel drive drift settings are not that different from our rear-wheel drive drift settings. Our body height adjustment is lower at the rear than the front, giving us a squatting stance. And our natural frequency is softer at the rear than it is at the front. This provides more directional drift and push power. Our differential settings have been maxed out completely, and our front-rear torque distribution is completely biased towards the rear. Let's get to drifting at Suzuka. This Audi TT Coupe was capable of drifting with the race tune and only changing to comfort hard tyres. But with a few adjustments, the drift becomes easier to hold, and once settled, the drift becomes far more stable. Drifting four-wheel drive vehicles on GT7 is a different bag of beans. Shifting gears while on full lock and full throttle causes a heavy snapback, so it's best to release the steering input just for a moment when switching gears. The TT Coupe drifts reasonably well and is easy to place on the circuit. It handles well at low RPM, but does get understeery at high RPM. Increasing the RPM can broaden the arc of the drift, but it does come at a cost of steering. The power delivery is adequate, although a touch on the lazy side, so be sure to keep the revs in the power band to keep from gripping up, bogging down and losing the drift. The TT Coupe is not a standout drift car, but it does perform reasonably well. the Audi TT Coupe 3.2 Quattro begins its life as a modest vehicle with slippery tyres and sloppy suspension. When completely modified and tuned, it transforms into an impressive mini track beast, more than capable of holding its own on most circuits. In the drift arena, it is a reasonable entry, but is far from a go-to vehicle. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing!